I was a homicide detective with the NYPD for just over 16 years. 16 years of misery, pain, and death on a daily basis. I wish I could say that getting a conviction for a suspect I'd put the cuffs on could be satisfying, but it wasn't. In my first year of the job, we bagged a guy who'd killed 2 tourists just to take a few dollars out of their wallets. That same guy took a plea deal, did just 14 years, and was out in the second to last year of my time working for the Detectives Bureau. I think that's when I decided I'd just about had enough. As a homicide detective, you want to get murderers off the street for good, not to just delay the whole cycle of violence by just a decade or so. I felt useless, like I was just a cog in a machine that didn't even work properly. Then, about a year before I put my papers in, I spoke to an old partner of mine who'd left the job to become an independent private investigator down in Miami. He said it was the best decision he'd ever made, that he was raking in 3 times the salary without having to do any of the serious dirty work that made being a homicide detective almost unbearable. He also mentioned that if you get a good reputation for delivering on investigations, or if people hear you're an ex-cop, that the job offers come so thick and fast that you can pretty much just cherry-pick the jobs you want while naming your price. By that time, I was divorced, had grown-up kids in college across the country, so there really wasn't anything tying me to New York City. And so, once I worked my notice period, I picked out an apartment in Miami, caught a flight down to Florida, and started my new life in the Sunshine State. I started off getting the overflow of the jobs my ex-partner couldn't find the time for. He'd get a call, have to turn the person away, but would give them the old, "I can't do it, but I know a guy," ex-NYPD like me, solid worker, smart, and diligent. Time after time, this got me well-paid PI work that mostly consisted of insurance and personal liability stuff. Basically, if someone made a personal injury claim against an individual or company, I'd follow them around a little to make sure that their injury was genuine and that they weren't hitting up the gym or whatever in their spare time. But there was another kind of job that accounted for a great deal of the work we did, and that was suspected infidelity. A husband or wife would get in touch with us saying that they believed that their spouse was having an affair. We'd then follow the subject around for a while, tracking their movements whenever they weren't at the family home to see if they were in fact seeing someone else on the side. And, depressingly, more often than not, the suspicious party's gut feeling was correct. We'd catch them sneaking into some apartment complex with a bottle of wine, only to leave the next morning with a certain glow about them, if you catch my meaning. Sometimes it was more brazen than that, and more often than not, attaining a sufficient evidence of the affair required some serious tailing and stakeout work. And it was this kind of call that accounted for what turned out to be one of the most disturbing and terrifying cases I've ever worked. One morning, my ex-partner gives me a call and tells me that he'd passed my contact details on to a woman who suspected her husband of having an affair. When she called, she gave me the usual spiel about him disappearing for inordinate amounts of time, how his accounts of his whereabouts were inconsistent, and how their intimate life had dropped off almost entirely over the previous few months. To me, it seemed like an open and shut case. All I'd have to do was obtain the necessary photographic evidence, maybe snag some audio from a call the husband made to his mysterious side piece, and then collect my fee. Whilst on the phone with the woman in question, who I'll keep anonymous for reasons that will become clear, I made a note of all the pertinent information on her husband's hobbies, habits, and whereabouts before I got to work tailing him. One of the woman's main complaints was that her husband was coming home particularly late on certain nights of the week, then disappearing on weekends. He claimed to be at a certain place, like a bar for example, and then the wife would call only to find out that he wasn't there. It was a Sunday afternoon when I tailed him from his home out to the Glenvar Heights area of the city. I thought I had him dead to rights with the way he was acting when he pulled up outside a house, peering around like a rabbit peeking out of its den, looking guilty as anything. When he rang the front doorbell, I got my camera ready to snap pictures of whoever was about to answer, assuming it would be his paramour. Only it wasn't a woman at all. It was a man that he appeared to be rather friendly with. It wouldn't be the first time that I discovered that a husband or a wife was yet to come out of the closet, so to speak. Affairs didn't always happen with members of the opposite sex. But when I passed my finding on to his wife and showed her the pictures I'd taken, she told me that the guy he'd been visiting was a close friend of his. This all added up, given that to my knowledge, all they'd done was watch a Dolphins game on TV. I mean, I couldn't see the husband outright, but I could see the friend drinking beer and talking to someone who I assumed was our suspected cheater. So naturally, I figured this was a dead lead. I carried on tailing the husband for about 3 weeks, and aside from a handful of occasions where he'd visit relatives or go drinking with work colleagues, he'd only ever visit this one particular friend during these unexplained absences. From what I could tell from spying through a crack in the curtains, the pair would drink a few beers, watch a game together, nothing remotely objectionable. I tried to explain this to the guy's wife, how it was all seemingly innocent and that I hadn't caught him going anywhere remotely sleazy. But she wasn't buying it. She told me her husband had been acting weirder and weirder recently, that he'd started saying some pretty gross things in his sleep as if he were talking to a lover or something. When I told her I'd come to a pretty solid conclusion, one which didn't involve him actually cheating at all, and that I couldn't continue the investigation in good conscience, she offered me 50% extra for 2 more weeks of searching for evidence of infidelity. At the time, I didn't want to take her money. It would be morally unsound of me to keep mining her for cash, and I could end up ruining my good reputation in the process. But something about her pleas made me take pity on her. That, and she didn't exactly strike me as the paranoid type. She insisted that there was something to her suspicions, and either she could keep paying me, or she'd try someone else. That about sealed it. I told her I'd work the case for 2 more weeks, but after that, she'd be on her own. The next time I tailed him, it was a weeknight, one in which I'd followed him from his downtown office job out to the residence in Glenbar. I figured it would be yet another night of watching silent sports on someone else's TV through a crack in the curtains. Only this time, the guy hadn't quite closed them all the way, so I had a much better view of the room they were supposedly in. I say supposedly because after the husband was welcomed into the home, he only joined his friend in the TV room for like a minute or 2 tops before heading off to another part of the house. At least I'm assuming that's what he did, because he didn't reappear in the TV room for another 2 hours. That's when I realized that on each of these visits, he'd been following the same pattern of behavior. I'd assumed that he was watching TV with his buddy, only he wasn't. The buddy was talking to someone on speakerphone. I'd made a huge error of judgment. Something weird was going on in that house, and it was something that was essentially confirmed to be seedy when the husband exited the house at one point in a state of undress. His tie was off, his shirt was untucked, and like something out of a bad movie, he'd actually forgotten to zip his fly back up. The next time I followed the husband to his friend's house, I brought along what's known as a parabolic microphone that had an attached recorder. This is a special kind of mic that basically uses a kind of small satellite dish to collect and focus sound waves. They don't always produce the best quality audio, even expensive ones like mine, but they can be very effective at eavesdropping on distant conversations. I paid almost $1,500 for the model I use, but trust me, the thing has ended up paying for itself, and I've used it on more than one occasion to secure hard audio evidence in an insurance fraud or infidelity investigation. So after the husband arrives at the friend's place, I turn in the parabolic mic to the window of the TV room, then listen in for anything incriminating. That's when the plot really started to thicken, as they say. From what I could gather, the husband arrives, he and his friend make a little small talk, then there's a cash amount exchanged, with the husband giving his friend a sizable amount of money before heading off into another room. Again, after a few hours, the husband reappears, sounding pretty well blissed out. The 2 guys make small talk again, then the husband leaves. My first thought is that it was some kind of narcotic situation, that the husband was using his friend's place to use heroin or something along those lines. The only thing I could do to confirm my suspicions was stake the place out to see who else came and went. That way I'd know for certain if there was some kind of drug-dealing situation occurring, or if it was something more insidious. Lo and behold, the house was receiving visitors multiple times during all hours of the day and night. Each time there'd be an exchange of cash before the visitor would disappear into another part of the house for varying amounts of time. From the kind of conversation that was going on before and afterward, there was no way of me knowing exactly what was being sold, or if the gentlemen callers were paying for time stayed, the amount of narcotics, or both. But during one visit, I overheard something that might prove to be my ticket finding out what was going on in that house. One of the visitors tells the homeowner, through a series of implications and innuendos, that they have a friend who's interested in stopping by to patronize whatever services the guy was offering. The homeowner tells him to pass on his address, but not to use any cell phones, ever, then gives him a code word to use when stopping by so he'd know it wasn't the cops. Bingo. I had my way in, and all it would take would be a little look around the house and I'd be able to know for certain what it was that my client's husband was doing when he was over there. I thought it was something shameful, something sleazy, but I don't think I ever could have prepared myself for what I was about to find. I waited a couple of hours before I made my move, ensuring no one else was visiting, but also so that there was enough time elapsed between the visits so the homeowner wouldn't be too suspicious about me pretending to be the previous caller's referral. So I walk up to the house, ring the doorbell, then give the homeowner the story about having been referred by the previous visitor, along with agreed-upon code word. He seems a little cautious at first, but he lets me into the house, showing me into the TV room, then asks for $300 in cash before telling me to wait there while he got stuff ready for me. I'm still under the impression that the place was some kind of drug house, that maybe he was going to clean up some puke in the other room, perhaps get some clean needles or something. In my mind, these suspicions are pretty much confirmed when he comes back into the TV room a few minutes later, then asks me if I'm ready while taking off a pair of rubber gloves. I follow him down a hallway and pick up on the smell of cleaning products on the air around him. But when he showed me into the room that I presumed all the other visitors had paid to be inside, my jaw almost hit the floor. The interior looked like a slaughterhouse. One wall was floor-to-ceiling animal cages, and inside them were all kinds of smaller household pets and other similarly sized animals. Cats, smaller breeds of dogs, guinea pigs, chickens, rodent-like creatures that I only later learned were named chinchillas, and there must have been at least 20 to 30 different animals locked away in there. Then, in the center of the room, there was this large wooden table stained with blood, and on it sat all manners of tools and kitchen utensils. Like I said, I had assumed it was a drug house, even toyed with the idea that it was some kind of brothel, but never in a million years did I suspect that the place was some kind of snuff-related venture on the part of the owner. The fact that my client had suspected their husband of infidelity given the strong sensual overtones, only to find out that the cause of his long absences was that he seemed to be getting off on killing small animals, was one of the most disturbing revelatory moments of my life, even during my time with NYPD homicide. People killing people was bad enough, but human beings taking the lives of small innocent animals for what was apparently some kind of twisted gratification was something I have struggled to get out of my mind. I took some pictures of the interior of the room, then immediately left the house to call the police. As far as I know, the homeowner was arrested on animal cruelty charges and is looking at time in prison for his crimes. Unfortunately, this was all before the previous administration signed a bill making animal cruelty a federal offense, so the guy isn't going to get as much time as I'd like him to. I showed the pictures of the kill room to my client, with the strong recommendation that she move out of the house and file for a divorce as soon as possible. I explained that more often than not, people that harm animals graduate to hurting human beings at some point, and that I strongly suspected that her life would be in danger if she chose to stay with him. Shortly after my retirement from the LAPD, I managed to land a job as a private investigator. It was only supposed to be as a change of pace to wean myself off the high-paced lifestyle, one that had the added bonus of padding out my retirement account until I was ready to just sit on my butt or play golf for the rest of my life. This is the story of one of the few cases I didn't take, one that was this weird mix of scary and upsetting for me, one that really made me glad I was making the move to step away from the general public, because, as you probably know, they can be absolutely insane. So the company I ended up getting hired by had an office on the ground floor of a building right across from the county courthouse, with a pair of automatic double doors that opened up right onto the street outside. This meant that we got a lot of people just walking in right from the sidewalk, sometimes apparently out of total spontaneity. Now, if the day was pretty quiet, I'd clock out and go home around 4 in the afternoon, which on this particular day I was very much looking forward to doing. But just 15 minutes before I was planning on getting out of there, I get a call from the secretary asking if I'm free to see a prospective client. I didn't figure that it'd take all that long, so I agree to see them, then get a knock on my office door from a guy with a briefcase, who walks in, sits down, and then starts asking me all the usual financial and logistical questions, my hourly rates, my experience, that kind of thing. The guy seemed real agitated over something, which is pretty standard, given that by the time someone is willing to actually hire a private detective over something, things tend to have gotten pretty bad for them. After this barrage of questions, I politely ask him if there's anything I can do to help, to which he replies that a group of people have stolen his intellectual property. He then tried to take legal action, and the organization basically responded by gang stalking him. IP cases, as we call them, tend to be nice and basic. Get a hold of the company's copyright, compare it to the original, which is hopefully dated and trademarked, then boom, I take my fee from the damages awarded. I then ask the guy to tell me, in as much detail as possible, what ideas have been stolen. Then, to my confusion, he starts talking about how a year ago he ended up having a vasectomy performed at a local doctor's surgery center. He starts giving me names, dates, how much the operation cost. That's when I politely interrupt him and inquire as to why he's telling me all of that. He stops, his eyes narrow, and he gives me this look as if I just said something rude about his mother. He takes a deep breath, evidently tries to calm himself a little, then, in a whispered voice, he starts telling me something I didn't expect to hear in a million years. In hushed tones, he starts telling me that he's been bugged. Again, this seemed like a complete tangent, or at least that he'd started to explain how exactly his ideas had been stolen. But how wrong I was. The 2 points, the bugging and the vasectomy, were explicitly linked. He then tells me with a totally straight face that while he was under general anesthetic, that the doctor implanted a listening device in his balls. I didn't say a word, but I'm guessing the look on my face completely betrayed what I was thinking, because he takes extreme offense and starts babbling on about how no one believes him, that he's not a liar, and that he has proof. The claim about the proof piqued my interest, so I entertained his notions for a minute while he opens up the briefcase he was carrying and pulls out what appeared to be an X-ray of his pelvic region. He starts pointing to what were very obviously his family jewels, and more specifically, to a little white dot in one of them. Now, I'm certainly no medical expert, but unless he'd managed to make additions to what was obviously a genuine X-ray, it looked pretty convincing to me. I took the picture off of him, studied it, and for one of the first times in my entire investigative career, I was genuinely flummoxed by what I was looking at. Still, I opted for a conservative approach, telling him that I was no doctor, but that the chances of the little white dot being some kind of listening device were very slim indeed. I recommended he get a second opinion on the X-ray, on the off chance that it was some kind of tumor, and it would be really tragic if he was wasting his time over such spurious ideas when his health could genuinely be at stake. But to my surprise, instead of taking what I'd said to heart, he seems completely to ignore what I said, and goes on to tell me that some shadowy organization is using the listening device to steal ideas he's having for inventions before selling them on to big companies. He then tells me that he's owed millions upon millions of dollars because he invented AirPods, and the idea was stolen from him. Now, I know the chances of this are extremely slim, not because it was out of the question, but because, well, let's just say by this point I was beginning to get a sense of this guy's character, shall we say. But I'm not looking to offend him, so I decide I'll just give him a highball quote that'll put him off enlisting my services, which will surely get him out of my office so I can be home by 4:30. I give him a quote for a $100,000 retainer, giving him some bull about how my fee would be proportionate to the dollar amount he was rewarded and that, as he put it, he was owed millions upon millions of dollars. To my amazement, he accepts, but tells me I'd have to wait until he won the court case before I could get my fee. But here's the thing. In the state of California, only lawyers can work on contingency. This means that their fee is contingent on them winning the case for their client. Private investigators and all the individuals that might work alongside these lawyers still have to be paid, win or lose. I tell the guy this, explaining that I can't break the law, but if they found an attorney willing to take the case, I'd be more than willing to work for them to obtain any potential evidence they needed to win the court case. The guy goes quiet, and there are a few moments of awkward silence. I then ask the guy if he has a doctor he can trust that would be willing to take a look at the x-ray he showed me. Like I'm serious when I say I was generally concerned for this person's health, and not just because he seemed like he wasn't playing with a full deck. His face changes, his head kind of drops a little, and he starts looking at me from under his brow. I'd done more than enough in the LAPD to know what was coming next, so I back up in my chair a little and ask him if there's a problem. I'll never forget what he said next. I made a huge mistake here, haven't I? His voice was monotone, like I was talking to a robot all of a sudden. I replied as politely as I could, telling him I just thought that he might need a second opinion, but he interjects with, "You're one of them, aren't you?" Back when I was with the department, we'd arranged our interview rooms so that the cop was always closest to the door. This served two purposes. One, if the suspects tried to make a run for it, we could cut them off at the door. And two, if the suspect decided to attack the questioning officer, they had a much better chance of making it out safely if they were the closest person to the exit. Now, for the first time since I'd become PI, I was regretting now setting my office up in the same layout. Anyway, he makes his accusation, and I obviously deny it, but this guy isn't taking no for an answer. He starts calling me a plant, getting more and more aggressive by the second. Again, I start backing up in my chair, silently cursing that my concealed carry permit hadn't been granted yet because I knew I was in trouble. I knew this guy was about to attack me. And he did. He got up out of the chair he was sitting in, and suddenly he seemed much, much larger than he did when he walked in. He put one foot up on my desk, climbs up on it, jumps off onto me, immediately knocking me over. Then in seconds, he has me in a chokehold. I was honestly incredibly lucky that he decided to make so much noise in the process of attacking me. If he'd have gotten the drop on me and gotten me in that chokehold without alerting the company secretary, I'm pretty sure that I'd be 6 feet under right now. He was faster than me, bigger than me, stronger than me, and considerably younger than me. I had no chance in a man-to-man fight. I just thank God that the secretary alerted one of the other PIs who was on site, who managed to taser the guy to get him off of me. I got a little secondary shock since his arm was wrapped around my throat, but I wasn't about to complain too much. It was either take a jolt or never feel anything ever again. The guy was arrested, charged with assault, and from a few old buddies I had that still worked in the department, I found out that he's now held at the Atascadero State Hospital, an all-male maximum security facility that houses violent, mentally ill patients from all over California. I do feel exceptionally sorry for the guy. I can't imagine what it must be like to live and have to live with a brain that plays such horrible tricks on you. But I won't lie, I do feel like it's the best place for him, because it really was only a matter of time before he took out all of that self-righteous anger on someone, before he really put the hurt on an innocent person, and they might not have been nearly as lucky as me. On the 3rd of May 2007, 3-year-old Madeline McCann disappeared from her bed in a vacation apartment at a resort in the Algarve region of Portugal. More commonly known as Maddie in the media and to those close to her, she had been taken on vacation by her parents, Kate and Jerry, along with her younger twin siblings. One night, the McCanns left their children to sleep in the ground floor apartment that they were staying in while they ate at a nearby restaurant. Kate and Jerry had assumed that it would be safe to leave their children alone for the duration, since the aforementioned restaurant was just 180 feet away, which would allow them to momentarily check on them from time to time. But when Kate went to check up on the children at around 10 p.m., she discovered Maddie was missing. Over the next few weeks, Portuguese police managed to misinterpret some of the DNA evidence collected from the crime scene. This led them to suspecting that Maddie had died in some kind of tragic accident at the apartment, with her parents covering up their own involvement by faking a kidnapping. The McCanns were formally declared suspects in the case by Portuguese police in September 2007, but were essentially absolved of any suspicion in July of 2008, when Portugal's Attorney General archived the case on the grounds that there was too little evidence to take a case against them to trial. Britain's own Scotland Yard law enforcement agency then began its own investigation, Operation Grange, in mid-2011. After a fair amount of research, the senior investigating officer declared that he was treating the disappearance as a criminal act by a stranger, most likely a planned abduction or burglary that had turned violent when the perpetrators believed themselves discovered. In 2013, Scotland Yard released composite images of local men they wanted to talk to regarding Maddie's disappearance, including one of a man seen carrying a child toward the beach that same night she disappeared. Shortly after this, in light of new local suspects being identified, the Portuguese police reopened their inquiry into her disappearance. This caused Britain's Operation Grange to be scaled back in 2015 to allow Portuguese authorities more control over the investigation. But some of the detectives who worked on the case continued to pursue a small number of inquiries that seemed worthy of following up. A prominent British newspaper described the disappearance as the most heavily reported missing person case in modern history, and to this day, her whereabouts remain a complete mystery. Despite the fact that police in multiple countries were involved in trying to locate their daughter, the McCanns took it upon themselves to hire a company of private investigators to dig up information that might help regular police agencies in their search. The PI company known as Oakley International was based in Washington, D.C. in the United States, and was initially awarded a 6-month contract worth more than $500,000 that was raised mostly by charitable donations made by members of the public. Oakley International began to interview potential witnesses, delve through security footage, and trace clues all over Europe. But in 2008, the McCanns leveled a serious accusation at the firm's 56-year-old Irish CEO, Kevin Halligan, which meant they reneged on the contract, handing over only half of what the firm was apparently owed. Halligan was said to be missing resources meant solely for the purpose of finding Maddie, allegedly using them to fund a lavish lifestyle of travel and leisure. Halligan fiercely denied the claims, but it appears the man was no stranger to fraud. In 2012, he was extradited to the U.S. to face charges over an unrelated £1.3 million fraud, to which he pled guilty the following year. He was sentenced to 41 months in prison, but was deported from the United States soon after his court appearances because of the time he had already spent behind bars. Halligan had escaped the possibility of a lengthy jail term in the U.S., probably because he was wealthy enough to afford the best defense attorneys that money could buy. But because he had become central to the floundering and apparently corrupt efforts to locate young Maddie, he had angered a lot of people along the way and made himself many enemies, some of which vowed to seek revenge on a man that apparently used the little girl's abduction for his own financial gain, which is why it's so suspicious that he died suddenly at his home in Guildford, Surrey in January of 2018. Adrian Gatton, a TV director and investigative journalist who made a documentary with Halligan in 2014, confirmed his death to the Press Association, saying he had not been in good health. There was blood around the house, probably caused by previous falls when he was either drunk or blacking out, he said. His house was full of empty drink bottles. A lot of people wished him ill, but his death is almost certainly related to alcoholism. But following his death, a Surrey police spokesman said that we were called to an address in Cobbett Hill Road, Normandy, following a report of a man in his 50s having been taken unwell who subsequently died. The death is being treated as unexplained, and a file will be passed to the coroner's office in due course. Unexplained. Certainly not a word we might expect to hear following the death of a man who, as Adrian Gatton had phrased it, was certainly related to alcoholism. The fact remains that when the police broke into Halligan's home, they found bloodstains all over the house. There is, of course, the possibility that Halligan's corruptly wicked ways had finally caught up with him, that the people who were furious and vengeful regarding Maddie's disappearance heard of his apparent corruption and then channeled their anger toward him. But Halligan always insisted the media reports were a gross distortion of what actually happened. The print media in particular took this line that really nothing was being done. "I was living the high life on the proceeds of the McCann case," he once said. "Trust me, I didn't so much as buy a new suit. The money, all of it, is fully accountable. It's provable." It seems that Halligan was very keen on proving his innocence with regards to the Finding Maddie fund that he was accused of misusing. Perhaps the alcoholism he was said to suffer from was a direct result of the ire he had incurred, and was a manifestation of the pain that any innocent man would suffer under that kind of undue scrutiny. And maybe, just maybe, he believed that finding Maddie would vindicate him. Did Halligan die a natural death? Did he even die an unexplainable one due to his heavy drinking? No. Unexplained. That's how Surrey police described his death. There's every possibility he was murdered, and if indeed he was murdered, could it possibly be he had gotten so close to the truth behind Maddie's disappearance that someone, somewhere, felt that he must be silenced? The actual disappearance took place in Portugal. Halligan's death occurred in Surrey, England, and in June of 2020, a public prosecutor in Germany ordered an inquiry regarding a possible involvement of a 43-year-old man believed to have been living in a borrowed VW camper in the Algarve at the time of McCann's disappearance. The suspect's car, an expensive Jaguar XJR6, was registered to a new owner the day after McCann disappeared. These international connections suggested a coordinated network of child kidnappers, complete with a system of support and logistics that could prove deadly under the right circumstances. Yet regardless, it seems the case that we will never truly know how and why Madeleine McCann was abducted, where she is now, or if she is alive or dead. But if we ever do uncover the truth, we may just lift the lid on a terrifyingly well-organized conspiracy that has been responsible for the disappearances of children all over Europe, time and time again. And frankly, I'm not sure the general public is ready for that kind of information, nor are they ready to find out just how far the tendrils of such an organization really run. Daniel John Morgan was born on November 3, 1949 in Singapore, the son of a British Army officer. He and his siblings then spent the majority of their youth in Monmouthshire, Wales, where Daniel attended agricultural college in the small town of Usk. He undertook more agricultural training over in Denmark, but after a number of years working various farms back in the UK, he came to realize that agriculture was not his calling. You see, Daniel had an exceptional memory for details, with fellow farm workers noting that he could accurately remember long serial numbers and car registration plates after having had merely a glimpse of them. Daniel eventually left farming for good, moving to London with his wife and 2 children, and it was there that he set up his own private investigations company, Southern Investigations, in Thornton Heath. In early 1987, Daniel had been hired by a client to investigate alleged police corruption that was apparently rampant in London's Metropolitan Police. Daniel had conducted extensive interviews with a man named Detective Constable Alan Holmes, a member of the police force who had supposedly grown extremely jaded with the constant vice and venality of his fellow officers, and was ready to collaborate with Daniel Morgan in order to shed light on their misdeeds. Daniel had also enlisted the help of Detective Sergeant Sid Fillery, an officer who was based at Catford Police Station, and one who was passing Daniel information under the table, so to speak. By March of 1987, Daniel had accumulated a rather extensive collection of files on police corruption, and it was only a matter of time before he could run a thread through his findings to blow the lid on what would undoubtedly be a huge corruption scandal, one that would rock the very foundations of British law enforcement. On March 10th of that same year, Daniel was relaxing after a long day at work at the Golden Lion pub in Sydenham. He was accompanied by his longtime partner Jonathan Rees, who also had an extensive list of police contacts whom he had milked for information regarding the alleged corruption. The pair had been swapping information on their extensive findings together, with Daniel making notes in a small journal he kept on him at all times. Once their business had concluded, 37-year-old Daniel made his way out to the pub car park with the intention of driving home to his family. It is there that he was confronted by a larger man who demanded that Daniel hand over his wristwatch, a rather expensive collector's item that would no doubt fetch a tidy sum on London's stolen goods market. Daniel knew better than to try to resist, taking off his wristwatch and handing it over to the man, who he believed would simply flee once he had gotten what he was after. Compliant but still angry and defiant, Daniel then turned his back on the robber and attempted to climb into the driver's seat of his car. But it's then the robber took out a small hand axe and plunged the blade into the back of Daniel's head, watching as he collapsed to the tarmac ground, bleeding profusely from the huge gash to his skull. The murder seemed to be an open and case shut of armed robbery gone horribly wrong. But on their arrival, investigating homicide detectives began to notice a series of inconsistencies and rather telling clues. Although his watch had been stolen, the robber hadn't bothered to take Daniel's wallet, and had also left him with a large amount of cash in his jacket pocket. Now it might seem obvious that the killer had panicked, and then wished to flee the scene as quickly as possible to avoid being arrested on murder charges instead of simple robbery. However, further investigation revealed that the killer had in fact hung around the crime scene in order to relieve Daniel of another of his possessions. Daniel's trousers had been torn open around one of the pockets, and his notebook, the one in which he kept his wealth of information regarding police corruption, had been stolen. Police initially sought to arrest a single suspect in connection with the armed robbery and murder, but the more information that came to light, the more they realized something far more sinister was going on. A month later, in April of 1987, 6 suspects were arrested in connection with Daniel's murder. Shockingly, these suspects included none other than Sid Fillery, one of Daniel's police contacts, as well as his longtime business partner, Jonathan Rees. 2 more of the suspects were Metropolitan Police officers who were arrested specifically on suspicion of murder. However, all 6 suspects were eventually released without charge, since homicide detectives were completely unable to make any of the charges stick. Then a few months later, during the summer of '87, the other police officer that Daniel was working closely with, Detective Constable Alan Holmes, was found dead under extremely suspicious and mysterious circumstances. It was initially believed that he had ended his own life, possibly as a result of the depression and alienation he felt when police colleagues asserted that his collaboration with private investigators made him a traitor and a snitch. But a coroner noted that there were a number of inconsistencies regarding the injuries to be found on Alan Holmes' body, some of which were more consistent with assault or involuntary detainment than a straight-up taking of their own life. There have been many allegations and suspicions regarding this, and unfortunately, no concrete conclusions have been reached, and we can only really speculate on what happened to him. A year later, in April of 1988, an inquest into Daniel Morgan's death discovered that all was not well regarding professional relationships at Southern Investigations. A handful of company insiders claimed that Daniel Morgan and his partner Jonathan Rees, the very same man who was arrested in connection with his death, had been arguing extensively in the run-up to the former's murder. Apparently, Rees had told the company accountant that police officers he knew well were either going to kill Morgan themselves or have it arranged using various shady underworld connections. He also told Lennon that in the aftermath of Morgan's death, that none other than Sid Fillery, the officer who had been feeding them information, would replace him as Rees' partner at Southern Investigations. Although Rees straight up denied murdering his former partner, or having anything to do with the planning of it, he was held dead to rights over the Sid Fillery comment, who had indeed joined the PI company after a medical retirement from the Metropolitan Police. Former Detective Sergeant Fillery was also alleged by witnesses to have tampered with evidence during the inquest into Daniel Morgan's death, as well as apparently having coached witnesses to give statements that would absolve him and Rees of any involvement in the murder. As a result, Jonathan Rees was once again arrested, Only this time it wasn't just for an abstract involvement in the murder, it was for the actual murder itself. But not only was he released, again due to lack of evidence, but the results of the ongoing inquest in Daniel's death concluded that there had been no criminal involvement whatsoever of any of the members of the Metropolitan Police. This is despite numerous arrests on top of the highly suspicious taking of their own life of the former Detective Inspector Alan Holmes. It seems a conclusion that suited many, but it certainly doesn't seem to suit the truth. From 1998 to 2011, a series of inquiries shed more and more light on what was to become a black stain on the collar of the Metropolitan Police. Jonathan Rees was also proven to be no stranger to corruption, as in the year 2000, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for conspiring to plant cocaine on an innocent woman to discredit her in a child custody battle. It was a damning connection and showed the general public that Rees was a man who could stoop very low indeed to get what he needed. Police also used surveillance devices on a number of occasions in an attempt to covertly obtain yet more information for use in another prosecution. More than once, these bugs recorded audio that linked a number of police officers to Daniel Morgan's murder, but a judge dismissed the recordings as mere hearsay, asserting that they were not substantial enough to be considered serious evidence during any prospective trial. Then, a number of years after Rees was sent to prison, another inquiry was mounted, with this one being kept a closely guarded secret. Detective Superintendent David Cook was appointed to head an inquiry to review the evidence, a man who once described the murder as one of the worst-kept secrets in southeast London, and that a great number of civilians and law enforcement personnel knew the identity of at least some of those involved in Daniel's murder. Detective Superintendent Cook also said that serious and persistent efforts had been made to tarnish Daniel's character, and passionately dismissed claims that Daniel had been targeted for assassination after he had been found to be investigating a ring of Colombian drug dealers. Cook said he was certain that those responsible were white British and almost certainly involved with the police force in some capacity. The secret inquiry resulted in the 2009 trial of a number of suspects, including Rees, but once again the case fell apart when it was decided that almost a decade of public attention meant that none of the suspects could be guaranteed a fair trial. Incredibly, Rees had once again escaped the justice that Morgan and his family so richly deserved. Yet amazingly, since his release from prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice, Rees has made no effort to hide his criminal dealings. It has become painfully obvious that he has a network of contacts with corrupt police officers who obtain confidential records for him. In order to get a job with the British tabloid newspaper News of the World, he claimed that his extensive contacts provided him with confidential information from banks and government organizations, and he was routinely able to obtain confidential data from bank accounts, telephone records, car registration details, and computers. He was also alleged to have commissioned burglaries on behalf of journalists. In his own investigation into Rees, Guardian journalist Nick Davies described what he observed as a devastating pattern of illegal behavior, and commented on the empire of corruption that Jonathan Rees and Sid Fillery built in the years following Daniel Morgan's murder, after Fillery replaced Morgan as Rees' partner. What seems terrifyingly obvious at this stage is how one man was capable of manipulating the British justice system for more than 20 years, simply to suit his own financial gain. And although he did indeed see the inside of a jail cell for perverting the course of justice, Jonathan Rees has managed to escape punishment for the most serious crime he seems to have committed, that of planning and executing the murder of his former partner, Daniel Morgan. We as citizens are supposed to be capable of putting faith in the criminal justice system. Without it, all we have is a sense of chaos and lawlessness, a world where we must take justice into our own hands when the state refuses to help us. What is undeniably more terrifying than any ghost or ghoul or monster is that we may well live in a society where those we trust to be our guardians are actually those who silence us, oppress us, and ultimately kill us. On September 8, 2017, 33-year-old Taylor Wright, a divorced private investigator, was enjoying life with her girlfriend, Cassandra Waller. The two had just moved in together and everything was going well, despite the stressful divorce proceedings that Taylor was going through with her ex-husband. That day, Taylor went out with a friend, Ashley MacArthur, in the hopes of relieving some of the stress, but it was a decision that proved to change not only her life, but also the lives of everyone around her. As the day progressed, Cassandra lost contact with Taylor when she stopped responding to her text messages. She contacted Ashley, who said that Taylor had been stressed and crying throughout the day and needed time to herself. Things got even stranger when Taylor canceled dinner plans with Cassandra, texting to say she needed a few days to clear her head. Cassandra knew that Taylor, as a private investigator, had the means and skills to disappear, and she grew worried. Taylor's loved ones were also concerned because it was out of character for her to just disappear, especially without first contacting her young son. Cassandra then went to the police, who suggested that she reach out to Taylor's ex-husband, Jeff Wright, to investigate further on her own. Jeff told Cassandra that their son had also been trying to reach out to Taylor, but he had not gotten any response. He then issued a startling warning, telling Waller that Taylor may get angry with her for involving the police in her business, and that she should be careful. Disturbed, Waller continued to search for her girlfriend and began calling hospitals in the area. After a week passed with no sign of Taylor, Cassandra filed a missing persons report, and authorities began an investigation. They wasted no time in reaching out to Ashley, who was the last person among Taylor's friends to see her before she vanished. Speaking with the authorities, Ashley recalled that Taylor still seemed stressed at the end of their meeting and that she had gotten into an Uber to go get a drink. She also, however, revealed new information. Weeks earlier, Taylor had taken $34,000 out of a joint account that she shared with her ex-husband and had given it to Ashley to keep safe during the divorce proceedings. Even more shockingly, she said that on the day of their meeting, Taylor had picked up the money, put it in a duffel bag, and had taken it with her. While Ashley denied having anything to do with Taylor's disappearance, a search team combed the farm where phone records showed Ashley and Taylor had been together on the day that she went missing. They initially turned up empty-handed, and investigators were forced to release Ashley. Those who continued to search the farm in question, however, soon came across a disturbing discovery: a human skull with a bullet hole. Investigators began extracting the body and found a necklace that they had seen Taylor wearing in a photo. The police were extremely suspicious that this was the missing private investigator, and that their suspicions were correct. Dental records later proved it was Taylor's body. Around a month after her disappearance, Taylor had finally been found, and Ashley, who still denied any wrongdoing, was arrested for first-degree premeditated murder. In the end, Ashley was convicted for murdering her private investigator friend over an amount as small as $34,000. It may seem like a lot of money to some, but in comparison with the value of a human life, it's a paltry sum of money to go to prison for the rest of your life. And that's what's so terrifying about this particular case. It wasn't revenge that was the motive in this murder, nor sadism or gratification. Taylor's life was taken away over nothing more than your average person's year's salary. It seems that human greed can extend so deeply sometimes that it can cause us to become bloodthirsty, callous, and murderous, which is most definitely a thought that'll keep some of us up at night. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, support your local femboy hooters.